So I'll say this much. For those of us who have lived and seen and observed, there are other Marxist-Leninist nations today as well, and have seen, they believe, they have an understanding, a central understanding of how people interact and how societies ought to interact. And it is certainly the case today that the leadership in China believes that. We should acknowledge that, and we should make sure that we don't for a moment think that they don't believe it. It's what Ambassador Bryan's speech was about. It was the fact it was acknowledged that they believe it and recognizing that we have to respond in a way that reflects our understanding of the way they view the world.
Let's not talk about the American media. I want to talk about the Chinese media for a moment. They are aggressive, to say the least. And right now they are aggressively defending, for example, TikTok. A small question within a large question. Is TikTok capable of being weaponized? Is that an example of what's going on? And generally, Chinese media has become far more aggressive than I've seen in 30 years since I was at the library the first time of watching it. Is that something you've noticed as well?
Yes, they're very aggressive. Two pieces to this. One you hit upon. One is I'll describe as their technology media. Without singling out any particular business, our view of these companies is we're neither for or against the company. We're about making sure that we protect the information that belongs to each of you, your health records, your face, if it's a facial recognition software, your address, all the things that you carry that you want to make sure the Chinese Communist Party doesn't have. We have a responsibility to make sure that the systems that you're using don't give them access to that. So whether it's the efforts we made against Huawei or the work that we're doing on other software firms, the American task is to protect the American people and their information. The second piece of this has to do with their what I'll call the state-sponsored media of China and their disinformation. You should know, and this is where I am concerned about the American media too. These are state-sponsored media organizations that take their messaging from the Chinese Communist Party each day. When American institutions pick up those storylines and carry them forward, they are in fact propagating Chinese propaganda, and we all ought to be wise to that. There was an editorial in the New York Times yesterday by someone who had a clear view that was antithetical to the American way of life. The New York Times ran it straight up without comment, forwarding, although albeit in the opinion section, but propagating Chinese propaganda. That is certainly not instructive when they're telling senators from Arkansas they can't simply talk about American freedom in that same media outlet.
You mentioned that a lot of corporate America, and you mentioned specifically Hollywood, have got deep intertwinement with the Chinese economy. So I don't want to talk about soft power, I want to talk about soft appeasement. One of my favorite sports figures, LeBron James, falls silent when China comes up. In the new Top Gun movie, the Taiwan and Japanese patches are taken off Maverick's jacket. They're not going to be in Top Gun 2, they were in Top Gun 1. What do you say, not to those individuals, but to everyone who has an American spotlight about their responsibility to be candid about the People's Republic of China?
Here's our ask. Our ask is, if you claim that you care about human rights or your social justice or these things, if you make that part of your corporate theology, then you ought to be consistent. And you can't be consistent if you're operating there in China without talking about and acknowledging what the Chinese Communist Party is doing in certain parts of their country, the oppression that's taking place. Look, every business leader has got to make decisions for themselves. They've got to be able to live with the decisions that they make. You highlighted a few. I'd simply ask this. If you run an entity and the United States government were to tell you you couldn't do something, put a particular symbol in your movie or put a particular name on your menu, if we were to tell you that, you'd say, nope, that's not appropriate, and it, of course, would not be appropriate. It seems to me that if you permit the Chinese Communist Party to limit you in that way, it's got to be difficult for you to go home at night.
Two more questions, Mr. Secretary. Because it is hot and it is warm, and everyone out here has been in the sun for a while. You're a West Point graduate, and as Governor Wilson noted, #1, so this might be tough for you, but we are like Athens was a naval power, America is a naval power, and as like Sparta is, China is a land power. Do we not have to change how we approach defense spending to put more emphasis on our naval resources than on our Army resources?
Oh, that's tough for an Army guy to say.
I know.
You're killing me. Look, I'll leave to Secretary Esper the details of this, but I can. Here's what I can say. When President Trump set out our national security strategy early on in the administration, for the first time, we identified China in a way that was fundamentally different than we had done. This isn't partisan, for decades. That was important because that was a signal to all of us, whether it's the State Department or the Defense Department, that we need to reorient our assets. And so, yes, you've seen the Department of Defense to begin to do that. These are big things to turn. These budgets are multi-year. It takes a while. But if you look at how Secretary Esper and President Trump are positioning our military capabilities, not just the tactical, operational, and strategic capabilities, but our cyber capabilities, our space capabilities. If you look at how we're thinking about this and spending resources in year 2, 3, 4, and 5, I think you'll see that our focus has shifted pretty dramatically. It's not to say that our efforts to protect America from terrorism are behind us. We still have work to do there. But I think this great power challenge that presents itself is something that we have recognized, and we begin to make sure that we allocate your money, our taxpayer resources that we have, to the appropriate ends to achieve American security.
My last question has to do with a former Secretary of State who was also an Army man, George Marshall. He gave a speech in 1947 at your alma mater, Harvard, in which he called on all the nations of the world to recognize that the world was in crisis and to choose a side. And he assured them in that famous address that if you chose the American side in asserting Europe, you could count on America. So as you make the appeal you did today, not just to Europe, where it's relatively easy to be outspoken, no, Norway has found it not to be outspoken, but to Taiwan and Japan and Vietnam and all of the Australia, all of the nations of that region, can they rely on America in the way that people opposing the Soviet Union could rely on George Marshall's assurance in 1947?
Undoubtedly.